The year is 1612. Prague Castle lies heavy under the weight of winter, its chambers dim with the flicker of dying candles. Behind closed doors, the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II lies on his bed, his breath shallow, his hands trembling as if haunted by unseen spirits. His skin is pale, his veins bruised dark, and yet beneath the sickness, there is something unnatural. A faint shimmer beneath the flesh, like tiny veins of molten metal threading through his body. The courtiers whisper prayers, though none dare to speak the truth aloud. The emperor's alchemists lower their eyes in shame, for they all know what the priests outside the chamber do not. Rudolph is dying not by an assassin's dagger, nor from the plague that haunts his empire. His death is of his own making. The poison is not foreign. It is the very elixir he believed would grant him immortality. He is dying with gold inside his veins. The rumors begin to spread before the emperor has even drawn his final breath. Across the courts of Europe, the tale passes from chamber to chamber, as fast as a candle guttering out in the wind. The emperor drank gold to live forever, and it killed him. For centuries, rulers have shared one forbidden obsession. Peasants prayed for salvation in the afterlife, but kings wanted more. They wanted to linger in marble halls, to sit forever beneath the crown, to outlast death itself. From the Ming emperors of China who swallowed golden elixirs, to the Mughal princes of India who dissolved gold into honey and saffron, to the European monarchs who poured fortunes into alchemy, the belief was always the same. Gold was not simply wealth. Gold was life. But among them all, none chased that dream more desperately than Rudolph II of the Holy Roman Empire. Born in 1552, Rudolph was destined to rule one of the most powerful thrones in the world. And for a time, he did. His court in Prague glittered with artists, scholars, and scientists. He collected strange beasts from distant lands, paintings of forbidden beauty, and objects whispered to hold occult powers. Prague under Rudolph became not just a city, but a labyrinth of secrets. Yet beneath this grandeur lived a man plagued by paranoia, isolation, and an insatiable hunger for forbidden knowledge. He avoided his court, hid from his generals, and trusted no one but the strange men he gathered in his chambers. They were not statesmen, nor warriors. They were alchemists, magicians, astrologers who mapped the stars and swore the heavens revealed his fate. Rudolph did not crave the victories of empires or the loyalty of armies. What he craved was eternity, and in his desperate pursuit, he turned to the one element that had bewitched mankind since the dawn of civilization: gold. His palace filled with men who promised miracles. Edward Kelly and John Dee, famed for their scrying and alchemical whispers, spoke of a philosopher's stone that could grant eternal youth and transform metals into treasure. But Rudolph cared little for the gold that filled his coffers. He cared for the gold that could be swallowed, the aurum potable, drinkable gold. His physicians, under his command, dissolved gold into tinctures of wine and herbs, brewing concoctions said to heal every sickness and turn the body immortal. To Rudolph, each vial was a chalice of sunlight, a divine liquid that could carry him beyond the limits of flesh. And so, one night in Prague, the emperor lifted a goblet of shimmering liquid. Inside, tiny flecks of gold swirled like captured stars. His trembling hand raised it to his lips, and he drank. The courtiers who stood in the shadows held their breath. Some crossed themselves. Some watched with fascination, as if witnessing a man become divine. The emperor's eyes widened. His pulse surged. His face flushed with warmth. For one fleeting moment, he believed he had stolen a secret from the gods. But gold is not a gift to be swallowed. It is not the blood of eternity. It is a poison, silent, slow, merciless. And while Rudolph basked in the illusion of youth, each sip was hollowing him from within. The emperor who believed he could conquer death had invited it inside his own veins. The court was silent, yet the air smelled of something strange, like a mixture of honey, iron, and death. In the flicker of the torches, a man dressed in robes of crimson raised a goblet to his lips. The liquid inside shimmered unnaturally, golden and thick, catching the firelight like molten sunlight. Those who watched dared not breathe, for they knew this was no wine, no nectar, no medicine of the earth. It was poison, and yet their king drank it. His name was Charles II of Spain, though the whispers in the corridors called him El Hechizado, the Bewitched. He was the last of the great Habsburg line, a dynasty cursed by its own hunger for purity, their blood so tangled with itself that their kings were born weak, deformed, and desperate. Charles was no exception. His jaw jutted too far forward, his tongue too thick for his mouth, his body too frail to rule. And yet, behind those dark eyes lived the unrelenting fear of mortality, the terror of leaving no heir, and the crushing weight of being the last torchbearer of a dynasty that ruled empires. The priests said his sickness was punishment from God. The doctors whispered of curses and demons. And the alchemists, they offered something else, something golden, something that glittered with the promise of life everlasting. The cup trembled in his hand, yet he swallowed. His throat burned as the liquid slid down, heavy as metal, sweet as honey, bitter as ash. Liquid gold, a concoction made by alchemists who swore it was the elixir of immortality, a potion that would restore his strength, cure his deformities, and bless him with vitality. It was the same dream sought by emperors, sultans, and mystics, the forbidden promise of eternal youth. But each sip carved away his body from within, even as he clung to hope. What madness drives a man to drink death in pursuit of life? What fear compels a king to swallow fire disguised as gold? Tonight, we step into the royal chambers of Europe's most desperate monarchs, where vanity outweighed reason, where science tangled with sorcery, and where golden goblets did not hold wine but poison. And as the last drops slid down the king's throat, the silence of the court was broken not by applause, but by the whisper that has haunted history. The glitter of gold is never life, it is death. The fascination with gold was never just about wealth. It was about power, divinity, and eternity. From the pharaohs of Egypt to the emperors of China, rulers believed gold was more than a metal. It was the very flesh of the gods. In its glow, they saw purity. In its permanence, they saw immortality. To possess it was to cheat decay, to hold in one's hand a fragment of eternity. But for some, it wasn't enough to wear it. They wanted it inside their veins, coursing through their blood, remaking their fragile bodies into vessels that could never die. Charles II was not the first. Long before him, the great Persian king Xerxes was rumored to consume drinks laced with gold leaf, believing it would make his reign eternal. Indian Maharajas mixed powdered gold into milk, calling it liquid sunlight. In the courts of Renaissance Europe, alchemists offered shimmering concoctions, elixirs where gold was ground, boiled, and dissolved into a potion fit only for kings. The promise was always the same: strength, youth, and the banishment of death. But beneath the promise lay silence, a silence that swallowed screams of pain, for the truth was far darker. Gold, indestructible as it is, does not bend to the laws of flesh. Inside the body, it does not dissolve. It lingers, it cuts, it poisons. What kings swallowed as immortality often rotted them from within. Charles II knew this pain intimately. Every sip brought waves of fire through his chest, his stomach tightening as if clenched by unseen hands. Still, he drank. He drank because the whispers in the palace were crueler than the poison itself. They called him cursed, weak, unfit. They said he could not father an heir, that he was the last dying branch of a once mighty tree. Every doctor, every priest, Every soothsayer reminded him of what he lacked. But when the alchemist held up a vial shimmering with gold, Charles saw something else. Hope. Hope that maybe God's curse could be undone. Servants watched in horror as their king grew thinner, paler, his lips cracked, his eyes sunken. Yet still, the golden chalice returned to his hand, again and again. To them, it was madness. To him, it was survival. He was not alone in his delusion. Across Europe, others had already fallen victim to the golden lie. In Florence, nobles had taken to drinking aurum potable, potable gold, mixed into wine and sugar, convinced it warded off disease. In Russia, the Tsars experimented with alchemical cures of gold dust and mercury. And in France, King Louis XIV was said to dabble with golden potions, though his doctors carefully disguised the truth when his stomach failed. What united them all was fear. Fear of age, fear of death, fear of obscurity. The men who commanded empires trembled before the one enemy they could not conquer, time. And so they turned to the glittering metal that had never rusted, never tarnished, and never aged. But gold, as eternal as it may be, is not life. It is only a mirror, reflecting the desperation of those who sought more than their mortal share. Charles II's life became a theater of slow suffering. His body, already fragile from birth, began to collapse under the weight of his own obsession. His veins carried not strength but poison. His stomach was torn apart by what his court whispered were divine remedies. And the king, desperate for salvation, continued his ritual until he became a ghost haunting his own palace. Even in death, the whispers did not stop. When his autopsy was performed, the physicians recoiled. His body, they wrote, was a marvel of decay. His intestines rotting, his organs shrunken, his heart the size of a walnut. No children, no heirs, no continuation of his bloodline. The golden cure had not saved him. It had ended a dynasty. History remembers him as the bewitched, a monarch broken by sickness, rumor, and superstition. But perhaps he was something else as well, a man who reflected the deepest fear of kings. For power, no matter how vast, cannot bribe death. Thrones cannot buy eternity, and the chalice of gold, when lifted to the lips, delivers not life but a shimmering, beautiful death. The story lingers because it is more than history, it is a warning. To chase eternity in the wrong places is to invite ruin. To swallow gold is to swallow the very promise of immortality twisted into poison. The kings who drank it learned too late that the secret of eternity was not hidden in alchemy, nor in metal, nor in the deceit of men who promised them the impossible. The secret of eternity was that there is none. In the courts of Europe, whispers spread faster than any royal decree. By the late 16th century, the idea of liquid gold had leapt borders, carried by charlatans, alchemists, and men who swore they had unlocked the very secret of immortality. In smoky chambers filled with strange instruments, crucibles and glass flasks shimmered in the firelight as powdered gold was dissolved in acids and mixed with wine. They called it aurum potable, potable gold, and it was sold for a king's ransom. Imagine a noble, pale from disease, clutching a small vial no bigger than his thumb, believing it held salvation. The bitter metallic liquid touched his tongue, burning slightly as it slid down his throat. In that instant, he thought he was drinking eternity itself. But what he swallowed instead was slow poison. At the heart of this fever stood one man, Rudolph II, the Holy Roman Emperor. His court in Prague became a magnet for mystics, alchemists, and visionaries. He surrounded himself with men who promised transmutation, philosophers who swore they could capture the divine essence of metals, and astrologers who charted the heavens in search of eternal youth. His castle became less a palace and more a laboratory, where the air reeked of sulfur and ambition. Rudolph was not a warrior king. He was a dreamer, plagued by melancholy, consumed by obsessions. While the armies of Europe clashed, Rudolf sat surrounded by alchemists, demanding that they find the elixir that would keep him strong, young, and untouched by death. He believed in the sacred power of gold more than in the loyalty of his generals. The more he consumed, the weaker he grew. His mind frayed under the weight of paranoia. His body rotted from within. Ministers whispered of his madness. Courtiers plotted around his fading strength. Yet Rudolf clung to his golden drafts, convinced that salvation was just another vial away. What the alchemist sold was not eternal life, but decay dressed in shimmering promises. Every sip etched madness deeper into his soul. The emperor who once ruled vast lands became a prisoner of his own obsessions, his empire slipping through his trembling hands. And yet Rudolf was not alone. Across courts and kingdoms, from France to England, rulers and nobles continued to toy with the forbidden dream. They believed that gold, untarnished, incorruptible, could shield them from death. They saw it as the one substance worthy of their royal blood. But the truth, hidden in the silent suffering of their bodies, was that gold was never meant to flow through veins. By the time Rudolf's reign collapsed into chaos, the myth of liquid gold had already rooted itself deep in Europe's darkest corners. And somewhere, in the flickering light of alchemical furnaces, the promise of immortality still glimmered, just out of reach. In the end, Prague became less a city of splendor and more a cage of shadows. Rudolf II, once the sovereign of half of Europe, was now a ghost wandering his own castle. The corridors echoed with footsteps that weren't there, and he swore he saw figures watching him from the corners of his chambers. His servants whispered that the emperor muttered to himself through the night, clutching bottles of strange elixirs, sipping gold as if it were holy wine. The empire crumbled around him. His generals abandoned him, his ministers betrayed him, and his own family turned against him. His younger brother Matthias, sharper and colder, saw Rudolf's obsession with alchemy as weakness. And weakness in the brutal game of kingship was unforgivable. Bit by bit, Matthias stripped Rudolf of his power until the once mighty emperor was reduced to little more than a prisoner in the very palace he had filled with alchemists and mystics. Yet even as the throne slipped away, Rudolf clung to his golden vials. He was gaunt, his skin waxy, his mind unraveling. He believed the next sip would finally work, that the divine essence of gold would burn away the sickness in his body. But each swallow only pulled him deeper into decay. His eyes dimmed, his voice weakened, and he sank into shadows that even gold could not illuminate. On a cold January night in 1612, Rudolf II died alone in his chamber. There was no grand army at his side, no cheering court, no alchemical miracle. Just the silence of a man who had traded an empire for a dream. The chronicles recorded him as a ruler consumed by madness, a king who trusted alchemists more than his generals, who searched for eternity and found only oblivion. But history has a cruel irony. Though his body was buried, his obsession did not die with him. The tale of the emperor who drank gold spread across Europe, inspiring fear, fascination, and imitation. Other nobles still toyed with the idea, convinced that if Rudolf failed, perhaps they could succeed. The dream of immortality proved stronger than the lessons of his downfall. And so Rudolf became a warning whispered in the courts of kings, the monarch who lost his crown chasing eternity, the man who swallowed death disguised as gold. Even after Rudolf's death, the allure of liquid gold did not vanish with him. His story traveled through the great courts of Europe like wildfire, embroidered by rumor and fear. Alchemists, those secretive men who promised the impossible, whispered that the emperor had only failed because the formula wasn't perfected. In Venice, in Paris, in London, wealthy patrons still paid fortunes for golden tinctures, believing they held the key to vitality. Physicians, desperate to satisfy their noble clients, continued to grind gold into powders and dissolve it into strange brews. Some called it aurum potable, drinkable gold. It was said to cure melancholy, banish disease, and keep the heart strong. The irony was sharp. The very substance meant to prolong life often poisoned it. Gold, heavy and unyielding in the body, did not heal. It burned slowly, silently, until the skin paled and the organs faltered. But humans are creatures of hope, and hope blinds as much as it saves. The obsession with immortality refused to die. Even centuries later, in the age of science, echoes of Rudolph's dream remain. In modern laboratories, researchers speak of gold nanoparticles, of miraculous medical treatments forged from the very metal that destroyed him. The dream still lingers, not in shadowed castles this time, but in sterile rooms glowing with white light. It is almost as if the Emperor's ghost watches over every vial and every experiment, whispering, "One more attempt, one more sip, and eternity will be yours." But eternity, as Rudolph proved, has never been for sale. Gold may dazzle, but in the end, it is only metal. The cost of believing otherwise has always been the same. Kingdoms lost, bodies broken, and names carved into history not for their triumph, but for their tragedy. Power is intoxicating, but it carries a hidden weight. For kings, emperors, and rulers, death was never just a personal end. It was the collapse of an entire world they believed revolved around them. A common man could age quietly, vanish into the earth, and leave little behind. But a king was meant to be eternal, a symbol, an unbroken thread between past and future. The thought of mortality was unbearable. It was not just their own life slipping away, it was the unraveling of their authority, their myth. That is why they clung so fiercely to strange remedies and forbidden promises. Charlemagne hunted for the fountain of youth. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, swallowed mercury pills that burned his insides. And Rudolph II, in his Prague palace, drank liquid gold, believing it would make his veins sing with eternity. They were not fools in the way peasants whispered. They were men terrified of the one thing their crowns could not protect them from. For every gilded hall and jeweled crown, death waited in silence. And so kings reached desperately for anything that glittered with the promise of immortality. Alchemists thrived on this fear, spinning their riddles of transformation, selling time in bottles and powders. The irony was cruel. The more powerful a man became, the more fragile he seemed before death. Rudolph was no different. His reign, already marked by instability, grew weaker with every sip of the elixir he trusted. Gold dulled his body, clouded his mind, and hastened the very decay he sought to escape. History recorded him not as the ruler who conquered time, but as the king who let fear guide his veins. In truth, perhaps the only immortality kings ever achieved was not through potions, fountains, or gold, but through the stories that outlived them. Their desperate quests for eternal life made them unforgettable. Not eternal in body, but eternal in legend. And maybe, for men who ruled empires, that was the cruelest trick of all. The candlelight flickered against the cold stone walls, casting long, trembling shadows that seemed almost alive. In the stillness of his chamber, Rudolph II raised a cup once more. The liquid shimmered unnaturally, heavy with the glow of molten gold. He pressed it to his lips, trembling hands betraying the weight of his obsession. To him, this was not poison. It was hope, it was salvation, it was the promise that tomorrow would never come to claim him. But tomorrow always comes. The gold slid down his throat, burning with invisible fire. His eyes widened, not with triumph, but with the terror of realization. The very substance he believed could preserve his life was unmaking him from the inside. His body, frail and failing, could no longer carry the burden of the eternity he craved. The king who sought immortality found only silence. When servants entered his chambers days later, they found the emperor not radiant with youth, but pale and still, a strange glimmer etched upon his lips. The alchemists whispered excuses, the courtiers spread rumors, but the truth seeped into history like a stain. Rudolph too had been consumed by the very gold he worshipped, and yet, perhaps, in a cruel twist, he did achieve the immortality he craved. Not in flesh, not in bone, but in story. For centuries later, his name is still spoken, not as the ruler who defied death, but as the king who drank liquid gold to stay young, and instead became a cautionary tale for eternity. Beneath the dust of forgotten palaces, his story still lingers like a curse whispered through time. They say the throne where he once sat still bears faint stains, not of blood, but of something that gleamed brighter, molten gold that had cooled into cracks of stone. His name is barely spoken now, for fear that uttering it might call him back, but the legend has outlived the man. Some believe his spirit wanders, searching endlessly for another cup, another draught of liquid gold that might restore the youth he could never hold. Others claim the gold never left him, that in some hidden tomb, his body lies preserved, its veins still glistening with the poison he mistook for immortality. And so, whenever you see the golden chalice raised in paintings or catch the shimmer of molten metal in firelight, remember this tale. A king who craved eternity, but found only decay. Because perhaps the cruelest fate of all is not death, but being remembered not for your reign, not for your empire, but for the madness that consumed you, one final sip at a price no soul could ever pay.